The galley of the Void Sparrow reeks of overspiced grox stew, its fluorescent orange surface bubbling like a tiny chemical sunrise. Tobin hums a forgotten Cadian marching song 3 notes off key, his stubby fingers gripping a ladle twice the size of his forearm as he stirs. Steam rises in spirals, catching the stuttering light panels overhead, transforming the cramped space into something almost homely, if home smelled of military rations and forbidden spices. "Too much red pepper again, Grint?" he asks himself, answering with a shrug. "Never such a thing, Grint." The Ratling's self-conversation continues as he tastes from the giant spoon, his face puckering before he nods approval. Above him, Mags lounges across a coolant pipe, her black and white fur collecting condensation like morning dew. Her single, intact ear twitches at every bubble that bursts in the pot below. The ship cat's augmetic hind leg gleams dully in the uneven light, tapping in a regular rhythm against the metal as her tailless rear shifts for better balance. She watches Tobin with the measured disdain that only cats can perfect, though her whiskers betray interest in the meal preparation. "You'll get yours when it's done, Your Majesty," Tobin says without looking up. Chef's rules, eaters before watchers. Heavy bootsteps echo down the corridor, preceding Harlan's arrival like thunder before lightning. The ex-guardsman's silhouette fills the galley hatchway, his beard collecting shadows. "If the stew hisses, we're not eating it," Harlan's voice rumbles, rough as unfiltered Amasek. "Relax, Sergeant. The cat's not on the menu," Tobin says, flashing a grin without looking up. "You hear that, Mags? Harlan thinks I'm cooking for the croot." Harlan sniffs twice, his face creasing into reluctant approval. "Smells like war rations with aspirations." Tobin's grin reveals too many teeth packed into too little space. "Beats what you'd cook, Sergeant Big Boots. Last time you made breakfast, Brigant wouldn't come out from under the nav console for a day, eh?" "The mutt's got no taste," Harlan says, sliding onto a bench bolted to the deck. His missing fingers leave his grip on the table's edge asymmetrical, knuckles white. "Neither do you, Short Barrels. That's why the captain keeps me around. Good cooking needs bad taste," Tobin says, tapping his ladle against the pot rim. It makes a sound like distant artillery. The air in the doorway shimmers, not from heat, but something less tangible. Regan steps through, her hood down, hair loose around her shoulders. Violet-tinged light clings to her skin like oil, dripping away in invisible rivulets as she enters the room. Her steps are too precise, too measured, as if she's calculating the exact pressure needed for each one. Behind her, Klein follows, pale as a voidsman who's never seen a real sun. His right eye scans the room while the vestigial third-eye scar pulses faintly beneath his skin. He twirls a small tuning fork between long fingers, its surface catching non-existent light. A soft hum escapes his lips, matching a note no one else can hear. "Stew's up, ma'am. Not my finest, but better than anything this side of the Ultima Segmentum," Tobin announces, wiping his hands on a rag tucked into his belt. Regan nods once, her gaze lingering on the overhead pipes where Mags is perched. The cat seems skeptical. "Always is," Tobin says, ladling generous portions into chipped bowls that have survived a dozen owners and 100 battles. Highest compliment a chef can get, doubtful animals. They settle around the table, a ritual performed countless times. Harlan sits with his back to the bulkhead, old habits keeping his sightlines clear. Klein slips onto the bench across from him, still softly humming, fork still twirling. Tobin distributes the bowls with practiced ease despite his height, hopping from foot to foot in a dance that suggests he's never quite still. Regan takes her place at the head of the table, her back straight, her eyes momentarily unfocused, as if seeing something beyond the galley walls. Klein sets his tuning fork beside his bowl, its metal surface vibrating without being struck. "The void tastes like copper today," he murmurs, more to himself than to anyone else. Ripples spreading outward, concentric like stonefall in still water. Harlan grunts, spooning stew into his mouth without looking at the Navigator. "Tastes like oversalted grox to me." "Salt preserves," Tobin says seriously. "Keeps the warp nasties out of your guts, eh?" The ship's deep, resonant hum, usually a background comfort, suddenly intensifies. Cutlery trembles on the table surface, spoons clattering against bowl edges. From beneath the bench, Brigant growls, a low sound that seems to come from somewhere deeper than his chest. The Voidhound's hackles rise, his amber cyber optic flickering as if scanning for invisible threats. Regan's eyes flick to the ceiling, tracking something that moves in patterns only she perceives. "Just the warp breathing," she says, her voice calm despite the sudden tension in her shoulders. "Tell it to chew quieter," Harlan mutters, but his hand has already moved to the last carbine slung across his chair. Old soldiers don't survive by ignoring warnings. The lights flicker once, twice, then steady. The humming fades gradually, leaving behind a silence that feels emptier than before. Tobin's spoon, dropped in the momentary disturbance, continues to vibrate against the tabletop long after it should have stilled. Its resonance matches the exact pitch of Klein's abandoned tuning fork. Mags leaps from her perch to the table in a fluid arc, landing without a sound. She pads across the wooden surface, ignoring Harlan's hiss of disapproval, and sniffs at the vibrating spoon. Her fur stands on end, and she retreats to Tobin's shoulder with uncharacteristic haste. "Never seen Her Majesty move that fast without promise of fish," Tobin says, reaching up to scratch behind the cat's ear. His jovial tone doesn't match the wary look in his eyes. Klein picks up his fork again, running his thumb along its length. The currents shift. Something responds to our passage. Regan rises in a single smooth motion, her chair making no sound as it slides back. "Keep the stew warm," she orders, already moving toward the exit. "We'll jump soon." Harlan swallows his protest with another mouthful of stew. Tobin sighs and begins collecting the half-finished bowls. Brigant emerges from beneath the bench, pressing his massive head against Regan's leg as she pauses at the threshold. She looks down at the hound, her expression softening for a fraction of a second. Her fingers brush the top of his head, and they both seem to shiver at exactly the same moment. "Yes," she says to a question no one asked. "I hear it too." Then she's gone, leaving behind the lingering scent of warp light and purpose, stronger than even Tobin's overspiced stew. The bridge of the Void Sparrow is a marriage of incompatible technologies. Imperial cogitators hum beneath panels salvaged from 3 different vessels. Mechanicus prayer circuits spark against retrofitted xenos tech. And at the center of it all, the Eldari crystal shrine pulses with violet light, cables hanging around it like supplicants before an alien god. The crystal itself, no larger than a human heart, seems to breathe in the dim light, contracting and expanding with rhythms that match no known biological function. Klein stands before it, one pale hand resting on the crystal's casing. His eyes are closed, head tilted as if listening to a distant conversation. The vestigial third-eye scar on his face pulses in time with the crystal's light, creating patterns of shadow that crawl across his skin. "Course locked," he murmurs, his voice carrying an echo that doesn't match the room's acoustics. The choir's restless tonight. His fingers tap a sequence on the casing that corresponds to nothing visible on its surface. Where he touches, ripples of light spread outward, like raindrops on still water. The neural jacks at his temples glisten with moisture that might be sweat or something else entirely. At the helm, Harlan hunches over controls worn smooth by countless hands before his. The ex-guardsman's reflection fractures across a dozen mismatched screens, his scowl multiplied and distorted. "Looks like soup to me," he grumbles, adjusting a throttle with his incomplete hand. The missing fingers leave negative space in his grip, like words redacted from an official report. Tobin snorts from his position near the auxiliary fire controls, a station chosen more for its proximity to the floor than any official assignment. The Ratling tears a strip of jerky with his teeth, offering half to the massive form of Brigant beside him. "Everything looks like soup to you." He fires back, rubbing the Voidhound's ear as the beast delicately accepts the offering. "Man sees the universe through his stomach," says the Ratling. Harlan shoots back, not bothering to look up. "Half your meals come out of a vat. Surprised the Inquisition's not after you for cooking up heretical potions in that cauldron of yours." He adjusts another dial, lips quirking faintly. "Who'd think a Ratling that can't cook?" Brigant's amber cyber optic clicks, focusing and refocusing on the crystal shrine. His massive head swings between Klein and the pulsing light, nostrils flaring at scents no human can detect. A low whine builds in his throat, not quite a growl but far from contentment. "He feels it too," Klein says without opening his eyes. The currents are conflicted, competing melodies. Regan stands with arms folded across her chest, her posture suggesting military training beneath the loose-fitting robes. Her gaze moves methodically across every station, every gauge, every crew member, calculating variables only she can see. The violet light from the crystal catches in her eyes, turning the gray to something luminous and strange. She watches Klein's communion with the crystal, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. Only the slightest tightening of her jaw betrays the intensity of her focus. "Proceed," she finally commands, her voice cutting through the ambient hum of machinery. Klein nods once and reaches for the tuning fork at his belt. With practiced precision, he strikes it against the edge of the crystal casing. The metal sings a perfect note, too pure for such imperfect surroundings, and the crystal answers in harmony, a chord rather than a single tone. The sound ripples through the bridge, vibrating through metal and flesh alike. Brigant whines louder, pressing himself against Tobin's legs. Harlan's fingers dance across his controls, making adjustments that seem more intuitive than calculated. Binary whispers crawl through the cogitator system, machine spirits awakened by the resonance between fork and crystal. The Mechanicus prayer circuits chatter in digital cant that translates across the bridge speakers as fragmented worship. Avev translation commence. The crystal's pulse accelerates, its violet light spreading through the cables until the entire bridge glows with unnatural illumination. Klein sways slightly, caught in the resonance, his fingers still holding the tuning fork as it continues to vibrate long after it should have fallen silent. "Current steady," Harlan reports, his gruffness failing to mask the tension in his voice. "Void shield integrity nominal." "Translation in 3, Tobin counts down, one hand on Brigant's collar, the other gripping his station. 2, 1. The void Sparrow slips through folded reality like a needle through fabric. The viewport fills with impossible geometries as stars smear into ribbons of light. Colors with no names in human language wash across the bridge, casting shadows that fall in the wrong directions. Klein's humming rises to match the crystal's song. His body arches slightly, caught between the physical world and whatever realm the Navigator part of him perceives. Veins stand out on his temples, dark against pale skin, pulsing with blood that seems to flow in patterns dictated by the warp itself. Regan remains perfectly still, the only one aboard who appears untouched by the disorientation of warp transit. Her eyes track something invisible moving across the bridge, her head turning with the smooth precision of a targeting system. 30 seconds to real space, Harlan announces, his voice stretched and compressed by the physics-defying environment. 29, 28. His countdown fades beneath the rising song of Crystal and Navigator, becoming just another layer in the composition of their passage. Brigant howls once, a sound that echoes too long and in too many directions at once. Then silence. The Void Sparrow bursts back into real space with a sensation like a held breath finally released. Stars snap back into their proper places, cold and distant through the viewport. The crystal's light dims to a steady pulse, and Klein staggers slightly, catching himself against the casing. In the absolute quiet that follows translation, the ship's communication system crackles with unexpected life. A voice, distant and distorted, whispers through layers of static. "The 5th." The words hang in the air before being swallowed by white noise, leaving behind a question no one asks aloud. Brigant whines softly, nosing at Tobin's hand. The Ratling absently strokes the Voidhound's head, his eyes on Regan, waiting for interpretation or orders. Harlan busies himself with post-translation checks, muttering technical litanies that serve as much to comfort himself as to verify system status. His missing fingers tap an absent rhythm against the console edge. Regan steps closer to the communications array, her movements deliberate. She reaches for the control panel but stops short of touching it, her hand hovering as if feeling heat from a flame. "Mark the coordinates," she finally murmurs, turning to Klein. The Navigator nods, his fingers already dancing across his station. Regan's eyes return to the stars visible through the viewport, searching for something among their cold light. Again. One word, spoken without emphasis, yet it resonates through the bridge with the finality of an oath. The crew exchanges glances but asks no questions. They've followed her into the warp too many times to doubt her now. Klein nods and begins the calibration sequence anew, tuning fork already in hand. The crystal pulses, anticipating another communion, another journey through folded space, and somewhere in the void, something waits for them to arrive. Condensation beads on the ceiling of the maintenance deck, gathering weight until gravity claims it. Drops fall in a rhythmic percussion, striking metal grates, exposed pipes, and occasionally the top of Harlan's head. He curses each time, as if the water has chosen him specifically, targeting the bald spot he pretends doesn't exist. The overhead lumens flicker at 30-second intervals, not an electrical fault, but a deliberate power conservation measure that no one ever bothers to override. Harlan shoulders a toolkit that's seen better decades, its leather straps cracked and repaired with wire and stubbornness. The metal box clanks against his back with each step, tools inside shifting like loose teeth. Rattling superstition, he grumbles, ducking beneath a low-hanging bundle of coolant tubes. Every creak and groan isn't an omen. Ships make noise. Behind him, Tobin moves with the peculiar grace of the small who navigate a world built for the tall. The torch in his hand casts elongated shadows that make him appear twice his actual height. His other hand rests casually on the strap holding faithful Nell across his back, the long las a constant companion despite the close quarters. Not like this one, Tobin insists, his voice bouncing off the narrow walls. Heard it during my third bowl, like an ecclesiarch's knee, old, pained, and promising damnation. That's poetic for a man who puts sriracha on everything, Harlan says, pausing at a junction where 3 corridors meet in defiance of sensible ship design. Which way? Tobin points left without hesitation. Trust the cook. We know the ship's guts better than anyone. They proceed down the leftmost passage, where the ceiling drops lower and the walls press closer. Ancient conduits, their function long forgotten, run alongside newer installations in a testament to the Void Sparrow's cobbled-together history. Scrawled calculations and half-finished prayers mark the metal at irregular intervals, the graffiti of previous crew members, some in languages neither man recognizes. A soft growl interrupts their progress. Brigant stands 10 paces ahead, his massive frame nearly blocking the narrow corridor. The Voidhound's hackles rise in a ridge along his spine, and his amber cyber optic whirs through targeting patterns. He stares fixedly at a section of bulkhead that appears no different from any other. What's he found now? Another nest of those void mites? Harlan asks, but his hand slides from toolkit to last carbine with practiced ease. Tobin crouches beside Brigant, whispering something in the beast's ear that makes the growl fade to a low rumble. Not boreworms, the Ratling mutters, sweeping his torch toward the bulkhead. They don't eat metal, probably why you're still in one piece, eh, boy? The light reveals what casual observation missed. A recessed panel, its edges nearly invisible against the surrounding metal. Faded sigils mark its surface, the kind of official Imperial markings designed to discourage curiosity rather than invite it. That wasn't on the schematics, Harlan mutters, stepping closer. Most interesting things aren't, Tobin replies, running his fingers along the panel's edge. Officio seal. Old one. Now that it's been pointed out, Harlan recognizes the stylized eye merged with a skull, the mark of the Officio Assassinorum, worn away as if someone had attempted to sand it down but lost patience halfway through. Brigant whines, backing up a step, his tail tucked between his legs. Whatever lies beyond the panel, it carries a scent that overrides even his considerable courage. Captain's business, Harlan says, hesitating. We should report it and... His words cut off as his boot connects solidly with the panel, contradicting his own suggestion. The metal yields with surprising ease, swinging inward on well-oiled hinges that have no business being so well maintained in this neglected part of the ship. Stale air rolls out, thick with the sour tang of preservant chemicals and something faintly organic, like flesh sealed too long in wax. The torch beam cuts through the gloom, revealing a small chamber carved from what should have been a maintenance closet. Sealed crates line one wall, each marked with the same faded sigil as the door. On the opposite rack rests a mask of slick, dark material, neither metal nor cloth, its surface gleaming wetly as if it might start breathing at any moment. Emperor's teeth, Tobin whispers, his usual irreverence subdued. That's Calidus gear. The sin-skin mask hangs on its display like a shed face, waiting for its owner to reclaim it. In the flickering torchlight, it seems to change shape subtly, adapting to the shadows as if still alive. "We need to go," Harlan says, but his feet remain rooted, eyes fixed on the mask. "Now." "Too late for that," says a voice from behind them. Neither man heard her approach, a fact that should be impossible in the metal corridors where every footstep echoes. Yet Regan stands there, her expression unreadable in the half-light. She moves past them without waiting for response, entering the small chamber with the familiarity of one returning to a childhood bedroom. Her fingers reach for the mask with precision that speaks of muscle memory too ingrained to forget. She lifts it from its display, and for a moment, the dark sin-skin shifts beneath the torchlight, forming fleeting contours that almost resemble a smile, an echo of some face long forgotten. "Some ghosts earn their keep," she murmurs, turning the mask in her hands. Her voice carries no emotion, yet something in her stance suggests reverence, or perhaps wariness. Harlan and Tobin exchange glances, a silent conversation conducted through raised eyebrows and tight lips. Neither man speaks as Regan returns the mask to its display, her fingers lingering on its surface a moment longer than necessary. She turns to leave, and they part to make way, Brigant pressing himself against the wall as if trying to become invisible. As she passes the Hound, her hand drops, brushing his head, a gesture so casual it might be mistaken for accident. "The Eclipse Protocol remains inactive," she says, the words clearly not meant for them despite being spoken aloud. "For now." The door seals behind her with a soft hiss, leaving them alone in the corridor. The sound of her footsteps fades too quickly, swallowed by the ship's ambient noise. Tobin exhales slowly, his breath visible in the suddenly colder air. "Well," he says, attempting to reclaim his usual tone, "at least it wasn't void mites." Harlan grunts, shouldering his toolkit with more force than necessary. "I'd prefer the mites," he says, already turning back the way they came. "Mites don't have history." Behind them, water continues to drip, marking seconds in a rhythm that seems deliberate rather than random. The maintenance deck returns to its pretense of normalcy, keeping its secrets behind sealed doors and false bulkheads. The Nav Shrine is a different place in the night cycle. Emergency lighting casts everything in blood-red shadows, turning the crystal's violet pulse into something deeper, more primal. Klein sits before it, cross-legged on the metal deck, his spine straight despite the visible tremors running through his body. The Whisper Crown rests around his head, a circlet of rediscovered tech from the dark age of technology, found on some forgotten world in their wanderings. Its filaments pulse in unison with the crystal, a whispering halo of control and communion. Tendrils of light drift from the crystal's core, seeking his neural jacks like curious fingers, connecting with small electric pops that smell of sanctified oil and blood, a mingling of ritual and residue, the scent of energy made physical, carrying a trace of something older. His eye is open, but unfocused, the normal right eye rolled back to show only white, while the left only bears a narrow scar that climbs from the corner upward toward his brow. It terminates just shy of the vestigial third eye, a faint swell beneath the skin where the organ never fully formed. The tissue there shimmers in the crystal's light, a map of half-realized potential that flickers with every pulse of energy through the shrine, while sweat beads on his forehead despite the chamber's chill, tracking down his temples in lines that glow faintly in the crystal's light. Regan enters without sound, her footfalls absorbed by the strange acoustics of the shrine. She watches him for several heartbeats, measuring the intensity of his tremors, the pattern of light against his skin. Her own skin holds a faint luminescence, as if she's absorbed some quality of the warp and carries it within her. She kneels beside him, not touching, not yet. "How deep?" she asks, her voice pitched low enough that it seems to merge with the crystal's hum, rather than rise above it. Klein's lips twitch into something that might be a smile on a less strained face. A laugh escapes him, weak, breathy, more air than sound. "4 voices," he says, each word precisely formed despite his trembling, and one silent. It listens now. His fingers splay against the deck, pressing hard enough that the tendons stand out like cables beneath his skin. The connection between crystal and neural jacks intensifies, the light becoming more solid, more insistent. They argue among themselves, he continues, voice dropping lower, Pleasure, rage, decay, change, all circling what isn't there yet. Regan shifts closer, her movement deliberate. She presses her palm against his chest, directly over his heart, applying firm pressure that seems to anchor him. The touch is clinical rather than intimate, yet carries a familiarity born of necessity and shared experience. Focus on my hand, she instructs, not on them. Beneath her palm, his heartbeat races, stumbles, then gradually steadies. As his head tilts back, the short silver hair at his nape parts to reveal the sigil at the base of his skull, a pattern of interlocked lines, old and imperfect, pulsing in counterpoint to the crystal's light. It still does its work, suppressing the visions that would otherwise consume him. The mark is a relic from before the Whisper Crown, when suppression was carved into flesh rather than wired through the mind. The shrine hums around them, the connection stabilizing. They taste like metal, Klein murmurs, and salt, and something burning. The fifth taste has no name. Regan's other hand moves to the back of his neck, supporting his head as his muscles threaten to give way. Her fingers press against specific points, pressure techniques learned in another life, when she was Eclipse 7 rather than Regan Seraphine. Breathe with me, she says, and it's not a request. Their chests rise and fall, initially out of sync, then gradually matching. His ragged inhales smooth out, mirroring her controlled rhythm. The tremors that rack his body begin to subside, muscles relaxing incrementally under her steady touch. For a moment, brief but undeniable, her skin's glow meets the pulse beneath the scar on his chest in perfect synchronicity. Light answers light, creating a circuit between them that has nothing to do with the ship's electrical systems. The temperature in the shrine drops several degrees in an instant, frost forming along the edges of the crystal's casing. Klein's right eye clears, focus returning as he sees her properly for the first time since she entered. The connection to the crystal remains, but he exists in both realities now, the physical space of the shrine and whatever realm the crystal has shown him. There, he whispers, his voice steadier. Balance point, the eye of the storm. Regan nods, maintaining the pressure on his chest but releasing his neck now that he can support himself. What did you see? Fragments. A vessel, not Imperial, not Eldari, older. His gaze drifts to the crystal, tracking movements invisible to normal perception. The four voices converge there, waiting for something, for someone. His hand rises, shaking slightly, to cover hers where it rests against his chest. The gesture seems unconscious, his focus still elsewhere. He's close, isn't he? Klein asks, turning back to her. The question hangs between them, weighted with meanings neither speaks aloud. Regan's expression remains impassive, yet something shifts in her eyes. A calculation, a decision, a truth withheld or revealed. Behind them, the crystal's color begins to shift, the violet deepening toward ember red at its core. The change is subtle but significant, like the first warning signs of an approaching storm. Klein notices it too, his body tensing again beneath her hand. Regan, he says, her name carrying the question he's already asked once. She remains silent, her gaze fixed on the crystal's changing hue. Light plays across her features, highlighting the sharpness of her cheekbones, the unnatural stillness of her posture. In this moment, she looks less human and more like some ancient statue carved to honor forgotten gods, beautiful but untouchable, present yet distant. The crystal pulses once, harder than before, sending a wave of pressure through the shrine that makes the metal walls creak in protest. The ember red at its core flares briefly brighter, then subsides to a smoldering glow. Regan finally withdraws her hand from Klein's chest, kept her movements precise and controlled. She stands in a single fluid motion that speaks to years of training and enhancement. Rest, she says, the word in order rather than suggestion. I need you functional for the next translation. Klein watches her, the neural jacks at his temples still sparking with residual energy from the crystal. And if he finds us first? He asks. Regan pauses at the threshold, her silhouette framed by the dim corridor light. For a heartbeat, she seems caught between identities, the captain, the assassin, the seeker. Then we'll be ready, she says, but whether she believes it remains unclear. She leaves him with the crystal, its color slowly returning to violet as the night cycle continues its artificial progression. Klein disconnects one jack, then another, each separation causing a small shiver to run through his frame. The crown itself now lies nearby on the grated floor, its thin filaments coiled like a dormant halo, faintly luminescent in the crystal's pulse. Even at rest, it seems to listen. The threads of light retreat reluctantly into the crystal's depths, like children called home at dusk. In their absence, the shrine feels emptier, colder. He presses his palm where hers had been, as if trying to recapture some essence of the connection they had shared. The scar on his chest, the sigil of House Orpheus burned out over his heart, pulses once in memory, then falls still. The galley feels different under proper lighting. Emergency fixtures replaced by standard lumens, the harsh red glow giving way to something approximating daylight. It transforms the cramped space, shadows retreating to corners where they belong. Steam no longer rises from Tobin's pot, dinner long since consumed, but the lingering scent of spices hangs in the air like an unofficial member of the crew, familiar and almost comforting. Tobin hunches over the antique hardwood table, its surface long dulled by years of use, his stubby fingers dancing across a deck of cards worn soft at the edges. Each bears a grim warning: traitors, mutants, and malcontents printed on the back with the words "Know the Enemy" stamped beneath, their faces smudged by countless hands across countless games. He shuffles with surprising dexterity, the cards flowing between his palms like liquid. "Old Munitorum deck," he says, almost to himself. "Back when they thought gambling could teach you morals. 4 suits: war, pleasure, change, and decay. Each one's got a saint. Win the saint, win salvation," or so the pamphlet said. Harlan snorts. "Yeah, how's that working out for you?" "About as well as the pantry," Tobin mutters, fanning the cards into a crooked spread. "Emperor help us, reckon we'll make it into the next edition?" Harlan doesn't even look up from his mug. "Doubt it," he says dryly. "We're more likely to get squatted before that happens." Tobin snorts. Wouldn't be the first time. He deals a few cards, then squints at his hand. "And didn't the Ministorum change the rules again? Aces are heretical now, or some nonsense?" "Yeah," Harlan replies, taking a slow sip. "Apparently balance is divine." "New rule," Tobin announces, his grin revealing too many teeth packed into too small a space. "No warp talk, no religion, no complaints about the stew." Harlan grunts from across the table, cradling his mug that emanates the eye-watering scent of his infamous Amasec Recaf blend. "Then what's left?" he asks, the question riding the line between genuine curiosity and practiced cynicism. Tobin flicks cards toward each player with sniper precision, each one landing exactly where intended. "Winning," he says, eyebrows waggling. "Try it sometime." Regan sits at the head of the table, her posture perfect despite the informal setting. The violet glow that clung to her skin earlier has faded, leaving behind only the faintest luminescence around her fingertips. She studies her cards without expression, holding them close enough that no one could possibly glimpse her hand. Klein occupies the chair beside her, his body present but attention divided. His fingers twitch against the table's surface, tapping out rhythms only he can hear. The neural jacks at his temples have been disconnected, but faint red marks remain where they attached to the crystal. Every few moments his head tilts slightly, as if listening to distant music. Beneath the table, Brigand dozes, his massive form curled impossibly small in the limited space. The Voidhound's breath comes in gentle snores that vibrate through the deck plates. His cyber optic remains activated even in sleep, scanning at regular intervals, a watchdog whose vigilance never truly ends. From a nearby ventilation grill, Mags and Stubbs observe the proceedings with typical feline superiority. Mags sits regally, her black and white fur recently groomed, while Stubbs, perpetually disheveled, attempts to squeeze his gray body through gaps in the grill that are clearly too small for him. "2 to the dealer," Tobin says, dealing himself the final cards. He arranges his hand with practiced movements, then reaches for the flask at his belt. "Ante-up, spacers." Small items accumulate at the center of the table, a ammunition clip with 3 stub rounds remaining, a ration bar still in its tactical wrapping, a small gear of unknown origin, polished to a mirror shine, a packet of spice that Harlan eyes with suspicion. "That better not be from my private stores," he growls at Tobin, who merely widens his innocent smile. "Found it fair and square," the Ratling replies. "Under your mattress ain't exactly the vaults of Moravec." Regan places a small crystal splinter in the pile, a fragment that might have broken from the navigation shrine, while Klein contributes a tarnished Imperial coin, its face worn smooth by handling. The game progresses with the comfortable rhythm of a ritual performed countless times. Cards exchange hands, the pile of stakes grows and shrinks, insults flow as freely as the contents of Tobin's flask. Laughter breaks out when Harlan reveals a hand so poor that even his scowl can't mask his disbelief. "Saints spare me," he mutters, tossing his cards down. "If my luck was any worse, I'd be servitor material." "If you were servitor material, they'd have taken you by now," Tobin says, collecting the pot with a theatrical sweep of his arms. "Too ornery for the tech priests, eh? They like 'em compliant." Harlan's retort dies on his lips as Klein suddenly stills, his twitching fingers freezing mid-motion. The navigator's eyes widen slightly, focus sharpening on his cards as if seeing them for the first time. "Interesting," he murmurs, laying down his hand with careful precision. 4 cards fall in perfect sequence: the Saint of War, the Saint of Pleasure, the Saint of Change, the Saint of Decay. The 5th card, which should be an ordinary playing card, appears blank at first glance. But, as it touches the table, it begins to glow with a faint violet light, pulsing in rhythm with Klein's heartbeat. The temperature in the galley drops several degrees. Brigand whines in his sleep, paws twitching as if running from unseen predators. From the vent, Mags hisses once, the sound sharp enough to cut through the sudden silence. Regan reaches across the table, her movement unhurried, yet somehow faster than it should be. Her fingers close around the glowing card before anyone else can touch it. The light seems to intensify at her contact, casting strange shadows across her face. "Luck favors the bold," she says, her voice cool as she slips the card into an inner pocket of her robes. Tobin laughs, the sound forced enough to be obvious, and refills his flask from a bottle produced from somewhere on his person. "That's why I keep saying we need marked cards," he jokes, gathering the rest of the deck with hands that tremble slightly. Harlan watches the pocket where the card disappeared, his expression guarded. "Omens and portents," he mutters into his mug. "Everything's a sign if you're looking hard enough." "Or not looking at all," Klein responds, his focus drifting again, gaze-tracking movement only he can see. Regan rises from her seat in a single fluid motion. "Continue without me," she says, though it's not clear if she means the game or something else entirely. As she moves toward the exit, Brigant stirs from his slumber, raising his massive head to track her progress. Their eyes meet briefly, human and beast, and something unspoken passes between them. Tobin deals another hand, cards slapping against the scarred antique table with renewed vigor. "New game, new rules," he announces, voice too loud in the space Regan's departure has left. First one to mention anything glowing buys the drink's next portfall. Laughter returns, perhaps a touch forced, but welcome nonetheless. The game resumes, stakes are placed, insults exchanged with familiar comfort. Life continues in its strange rhythm aboard the Void Sparrow. And somewhere deep within the ship, hidden from casual observation, the crystal in the navigation shrine hums another unseen note. It pulses once with that same violet light, answering the card now pressed against Regan's heart, the 5th element in a pattern only beginning to form.